All right, my first order of business is to get out of this wind. It's big open space and I don't want to be in it, so I'm gonna head back here into the woods. So the thing about these areas, the watersheds, is that there's tons of cattails. And cattails are probably the best survival plant material ever. Not a lot of people know, but if you get just at the right time, you can get this, this is the flowering portion of it, you can get it just as it's producing pollen. And then you can throw a bag over this and shake it out, and the pollen is full of protein and is a great survival food. You can actually add it to any kind of flour. You need a binder by itself. It's just a straight powder dry if you get on the right day. But the thing about it is you have to come. There's only like a 2 or 3 day window when the pollen's just ready to go, and it will separate from the flour, and then you can pick that up and store it indefinitely. And like I said, you can add it to other flowers. You could add it to the root, the cattail root, and but you have to dry that out and make it into a flower as well. So that's the next thing. If I was to dig down below here deep enough, I'd come up with a tuber, a cattail tuber, and that tuber is full of starch, full of carbohydrates. It's an excellent food. It could be boiled down and processed out, mashed out, and that white, you'll get a white milky substance, and that can dry, and then you can turn that into a powder for long-term storage. Also, as the season progresses, like in the spring, the energy is stored down in the root and the tuber, just like any perennial flower, and that drives down into the root. And then as spring progresses, the starch will shoot up the stalk up toward the flowering head. So you got to get all that timing right in order to get the most out of the cattail. And then as the season progresses, that stalk will become more woody and it's not as palatable. It could be roasted over a fire or boiled down to soften, but the best time is in the spring. And then now the plant, I mean, unless it had a pretty decent shovel, it would be hard to get at the root system, but in a pond or the edge of a lake, that stuff's pretty easy to just drive your hand down, feel around for the tuber, and pull the tuber straight out. But at this point, all the flowering head is good for is tinder, and even this as tinder is not the greatest, because for the last few days it's been mild and raining, and now it's turned back cold again. So this is actually fairly wet as far as being a viable tinder, and it's pretty late in the season, and those thaws and melt cycles have turned a lot of that seed to something that's not really very useful anymore. So I'm not even going to bother collecting it. The stalk actually, in the right condition, can be used for hand drill fire, although it can be quite brittle. There's a better plant called mullein, and that you'll find that in disturbed soils. That's actually really good for hand drill fire. But like I said, in this condition, this cattail is not too useful for me right now, and I could spend a whole lot of energy trying to dig out the roots, and I would be better off just to keep the calories I have inside my body at the moment, rather than waste it in pulling out the cattail roots. So I'm just a few steps up, and I've got some tracks. I'd say it's probably goose tracks. The difference between a goose track and a turkey track has a long middle toe. This one does not have a long middle toe. They're all about equal size, so I'd say it's probably a goose by the size of it. It could also be a duck. They have similar prints. As a survival food, pretty stupid to try to get a goose or a duck, although I could probably sit in the woods with a rock and pray that a goose comes by at just the right moment and my aim's spot on and I get one. But this river system is actually quite productive in itself. I know there's lots of fish in the river, small fish, invertebrates if I turn enough of rocks, and also trout. And I know this river system very well, and up ahead there's some deeper water which I know hold trout. Unfortunately, trout aren't in season right now, so I can't fish for them, but I could build a weir or a dam and scare some fish from upstream down and collect them in a little system here, and by funneling them with the rock, and that would work fairly well. Aside from that, hand fishing, I could hand fish. I could build some cordage and a gorge hook and bait that up, even set lines and leave them in. But again, that's a lot of work. As in a survival situation, that's something you want to think really carefully about. Do I want to use the calories that I have in my body stored to get calories that are difficult to come by? So in most situations, doing something like that's pretty extreme. You have to have a stored calorie set to work from. So it's not something I would just go gung-ho, jump in the river, start making a fish weir, driving fish from up down and trying to collect them. That would not be a smart move. There's a cedar tree behind me. Cedar tree can be made into a tea for vitamin C. The bark can be used as tinder by shaving it down. Other useful things, if you can find a dry cedar, it makes great bow drill implements. You can make a spindle, fireboard, the whole kit, and a branch for the bow section. So cedar is really great, and it's plentiful again in the river systems and in my area, boreal forest. So anyway, I'm gonna move upstream now, and I'm gonna see if I can get out of this breeze. Okay, now I'm just a few steps in the woods now, and there's a whole world of difference in here. It's thick, it shelters me from the wind. Big, huge difference. Survival, I could just sit here. I wouldn't have to build a shelter. I could just sit here until somebody came to find me, or I found my bearings and can get out. But I don't want to be out in that opening. That opening, you know, feels more comfortable to a lot of people, but to me, this behind me, all these trees behind me, this is my home. This makes me feel welcome. This makes me feel protected. And I've got lots of firewood in here. Also, if you notice, there's some more tracks down here. That looks to me, that's probably a rabbit track through here. If I had some wire with me, I can make snares, and that's a great passive way of catching animals. So putting a couple snares in through this little run here. Although snow is not very deep, I could pack snow and create runs for the rabbits and set snares in through those runways. But the snow this year has been very, very minimal. Actually, just noticed up the way here, I have some birch. Here's some more animal tracks. Yeah, so I have birch here. So whenever you find birch, because birch can be quite rare in southern Ontario, so I can grab birch. Birch is an excellent tinder. I grab as much as I want because this is a dead tree. Yep, has no branches up top, so I'm not worried about that. I'm gonna grab some of this. Actually, I'll grab a little bit now just to show. It's just easy to grab. So I'll work away at that. I'll grab a good couple handfuls, and then I can shred this down. It's wet now because, like I said, it's been raining, so it's going to take a little bit to dry. So I've just thrown my bag down, and I'm thinking now. I'm deciding where I want to set up. I do want to set up near wood because I don't want to work hard to drag wood through the forest. I could just set up near wood that's dry and ready to burn. I don't burn for any other reason than to cook, purify water. So I'm gonna stick to the edge of this river. This river to me is safety. I have access to liquid water. I can use snow, although using snow requires more energy. Even if you stuffed up your pot full of snow and melted it, you're probably only going to end up with a couple inches at the bottom. I could start with water, boil it down, have it ready to go inside of a couple minutes. It's a couple minutes less work I need to do in order to burn snow down. So minimal effort. So I'm going to stick to the river. Also, the river, like I said, has trout in it. So if need be, I can cast under some of these deeper areas in the water here. Here's another look around. There's lots more tracks in here, more rabbit tracks, so it's good rabbit habitat. If I had a weapon, I could potentially hunt them. They're mostly nocturnal, so it can be quite difficult. In the area that I'm in, they're quite spooky too, because this is the southern part of Ontario, and they don't make for easy prey. So I'm often asked, what kind of outdoorsman am I? And you get words tossed around like prepper and survivalist, and what's another one that commonly comes around? You get those are the main ones, right? Bushcrafter. Oh, bushcrafter, the bushcrafter. So I don't like to use any of those words, because I think, well, bushcrafter is kind of a term that's like came from bushcraft or bushcrafting, and to bushcraft is to turn the bush or elements of the bush into something of a craft, like a rope or a spoon or a cup or bowl or a canoe, even more elaborate, or maybe even a shelter. That's bushcrafting. And so a bushcrafter is somebody who does bushcraft, and I do some bushcraft, although it's not my mainstay. And as far as prepping goes, I'm not, a prepper is somebody who does urban survival, somewhat, and also wood survival too. So they do some bushcraft as well mixed in. But it's prepper is more like you're getting ready for a big mass global event, like a big virus or a big epidemic. So you might do some more urban scouring. You might go door to door and break into houses and theft, and that's just one element. Of course, there's also like you're getting ready, you're getting canned supplies ready, you're building a stockpile of whatever things that you need if organization and the grand scheme of the world broke down and the world disintegrated. So that to me is a prepper, and I whatever you want to do. It doesn't bother me. I just do what I do. So to me, my style is I'm a woodsman. I'm just a woodsman. I do things in the woods. And how do I learn my skill? I don't go out and necessarily, sometimes I do. I don't necessarily go out and like learn a skill. But I did recently pick up friction fire, and I went out purposely to do that. So that's a skill I learned because I wanted to learn, because I thought I should learn it. But there's other skills you kind of pick up as you go. So for me, I go out and I want to discover a secret lake. So I go way back in the woods from studying a map I might have, or something online. And I need orientation skills. And so I need to orienteer, so I need to use a compass. So there's a skill there. Then I need to get in the woods and actually get to that point A to B. So there's navigation. Then I need to figure out how to catch a fish, so there's fishing skills. And then, you have to learn about the behavior of the fish and the habits of the fish and where you're going to find the fish. Then you have to catch a fish. And once you catch a fish, it's presumably you've figured out how to catch bait or buy bait, but I catch my own bait at night, worms with a flashlight on rainy nights. And then you need to learn how to fillet the fish, process the fish, gut the fish. And then you need to learn how to cook the fish. So you need to make a fire, build a fire, maintain a fire, cook over fire. And at the end of it, you need to build a shelter or bring shelter with you. I use modern materials if I can, like a tent, sleeping bag, etc. But when I was a kid, I fooled around with building shelters. So that came just with fun. It was just fun to build shelters. I made tarp shelters, I made debris shelters, I made tunnel shelters, snow shelters, all sorts of shelters, and it was fun. But when you grow up, you decide, well, what, modern materials are better, and then I can focus on things that are a bit more fun than shelter building, like actually going and catch game. And so I hunt. So that's the thing, you learn the habits of a big game animal, small game animal, how to hunt, what they do, what you have to do in order to get a deer, like a deer or a big game animal or bear, or a small game animal like a grouse or rabbit. So I'm a woodsman. I do lots of different things. Not just one thing in particular, which I think is a little bit maybe more encompassing, but also it's more like just being there, just being in the woods, and experiencing the woods for what it is. So that's the tinder you want to find as far as birch goes. So I'm going to collect the whole pile of this. It's going to make my job a lot easier. As you can probably hear, it's fairly windy, but this is as good as it's going to get. I think I'm going to, for I think I'll put my shelter just right here. It's just gonna be, it'll just be a simple tarp shelter. Nothing fancy. I can't cut a lot of wood here just based on the location. There's not a whole lot of evergreen trees that would make good shelter. So it's not entirely feasible. It's definitely doable. But in this current wood lot, I probably would not build a natural shelter. It just doesn't have the type of material that I need to build it. You know, I need more evergreen type material or bigger palm leaves or something like that. Here it's mostly straight twig tree branches, etc. So having a tarp, just a simple tarp, just enough to keep the snow off me, and if it turns mild, the rain. But tonight's calling for a minus 10 degrees Celsius, so I don't have to worry too much about precipitation and rain and whatnot, but I don't want to get covered in snow either, because that wouldn't be very good. So anyway, I'm going to set up my tarp shelter right here. So that's just a simple tarp shelter. We'll swing around here. It's pretty tight in here, which is the idea. I don't want to be out in the elements. And I need one more log. You see I've got a log here and a log on the other side there. So I need another log to make the other half of this stick out. But you can see it's pretty much a tent, and it's all I'll need for the night. I can crawl in. I'll show you. So all I'm doing is I've got enough right there for my feet, and then overhead, and I can scooch back a little bit more so my head will be covered, and that's all I need. And this will work in any environment. Simple, takes 2 seconds to throw up, you know, and I don't have to cut a lot of material for it. So anyway, this will be my shelter. Okay, so the next step is I have just a plain blue tarp. I've got a camp mat, and I have actually 2 sleeping bags. The reason I have 2 sleeping bags is because my main one's only good to 0 degrees, and it's going to be minus 10. So you couple that up with my summer bag as my main bag, and then I'll throw the 0 degree bag on top as a duvet, and that'll keep me good to probably minus 20, so I'll be fine. So anyway, now to set up the tarp and the rest of it. The tarp on the bottom is just so that I don't get my bags all wet. The idea behind the mat is to keep an airspace between me and the ground, which is going to be awfully cold. In a different woodland scenario, I wouldn't have to insulate as much from the ground up, especially if it was dry. But here, where it's wet and I'm going to melt, it's going to be an issue. If I had spruce around, I could use spruce boughs, and that would work pretty effectively. But as a woodsman, we bring gear when we know we won't have it, so it's part of being prepared. So having this camp mat is pretty vital, as is having the tarp at the bottom here to protect against the moisture on the ground. Aside from spending a whole lot of calories building raised bed surface with logs and whatnot, which is possible, and something that I could do as well, but it would require a big investment, and it would make me anchored to a specific point, whereas this system here I can take down and put up in a matter of just moments. So if I want to be more migratory, this is the system for me. If I had an animal hide like the Native Americans, I could pack that up and take that with me too, teepee style, and migrate with the animals. But you know, we're modern human, and I don't have the investment of an animal hide at the moment, so I'm using, you know, what I have with me. So in goes sleeping bag number 1. This is my summer bag. And then I have my winter bag, which is going to be opened up as my duvet. So here are the things I carry with me almost all the time. I have a pot with a lid for boiling water, a must. You can boil without a lid, but having a lid that latches. You can see this lid here. That's my venison. I've got a pot underneath, so it's kind of nested. The handle folds together. But anyway, I can pull this lid on and fold this over, and then there's a latch here. That'll latch down. So that's the boiling water. The pan is for cooking meat in this case. I'll use the pot also to cook. I'll use the pot to cook rice. I have rice here with me. So I've got rice here in a mug. And that's a pretty simple bush lunch. I also carry with me a heavy-duty bush knife. I have an extra pot just in case I want to boil water by itself, and then I can transfer to here for cooking. I have a smaller knife as a backup, and to do finer work, such as you know, building you know, anything I need around camp. A saw is an absolute must. Small folding saw, lightweight. I have a kit here, a bunch of kits that I've built over a number of years, or a number of months, I should say. So that's my spindle, earth board. I've got a bearing block and a bow drill. I can build primitive fire from scratch, but it's going to be a 4-hour project most likely. And not something that you can rely on for survival. I found, you know, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. If it doesn't work, you've lost your day. So that brings me to my other stuff. I have matches in a waterproof bag. In here is emergency tinder. I get this open. So in here is cotton ball soaked in Vaseline. That will catch an ember instantly. So if I get caught in a situation that's really you know, it's vital that I get a fire going quickly, this will do it. So this weighs practically nothing and is super important. What else do I have here? I have my fire steel, you know, and get like I'm caught up in a piece of the rope here. Fire steel, just a simple fire steel. This will, you know, I get like thousands and thousands of fires out of the fire steel. So fire steel definitely a must. I've got another set of matches in old film canister, waterproof, or mostly waterproof. I have some Vaseline, you never know, dressing wounds, chapped lips, dry skin, that'll fix it. The little sharpener, this I can sharpen hooks with, sharpen a knife with, although it's kind of crude. I do keep it for fishing though, sharpening hooks. And I happen to have a few spare batteries, and that's for my flashlight. I don't need a flashlight. I could see pretty well in the dark as far as navigating, but you know, it's pretty lightweight. It's easy to carry. Why not? And I have a extra little rope here. So that's what I carry with me on a fairly regular basis. I've stored my tinder up in here. It's drying, although it is quite wet. I don't know how well it will work. I may need assistance from my emergency tinder, or I might have to shave some cedar bark and work on that a little bit. So anyway, that's the gear I carry with me. So as far as getting food in this situation goes, I don't think it's feasible, to be honest with you. I'm familiar with this type of woodland, and in the winter, primitive cultures would have stored food for the winter. They would be, you know, doing some fishing and whatnot. I could do some fishing here, like I say, but it's out of season, so my mainstay would be fishing. But if I was in a purely survival situation, I would be doing energy in, energy out, calorie counting, mathematical. Very pragmatic about how I would spend my energy. I wouldn't be going procuring food in an environment like this. I don't think it's reasonable. I could put some snares up. By happenstance, I might catch a few animals. More than likely, I would probably burn more calories than I would be able to consume. So I think it's important to keep that sort of thing in perspective. Put me in a different environment, an environment of plenty. I would be more active as far as finding game. You know, in the summer, amphibians like frogs, super easy to catch. Well, I shouldn't say super, depending on temperature, they're cold-blooded. Snakes, easy to catch. But like I said, not in this environment. There's snakes. I see snakes twice a year. I might see a turtle that slips in the water really quickly. Rabbits are super skittish. Grouse flush instantaneously. You know, I could build a tree stand, I could sit up a knoll, you know, build a primitive bow. That might take me a day. I might have to sit 30 days before I see a deer or get a shot at a deer, you know. So I don't think it's super feasible to be saying in this environment right now on this season I'd go out and do X to find food. But I'm pretty resourceful, so I can figure out a system pretty quickly if given the opportunity. Just right now it's hard for me to say, how would I go get food? How would I go get food? Well, I'd have stored food, you know, from the big game animal, the venison that I brought with me today, that I stored and kept. That's what I would be doing today. I would have stored cattail root, dried it, prepared it, cured it. Other wild edibles, berries, raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, apples. They're all native to here, around here. I can find them fairly easily. I have a garden. I grow some crop, which I do at my own house. And I eat from my backyard garden daily. So those are the kinds of things I think you have to be prepared for. This is the type of climate that you can't come into and just say, I'm gonna go get food today. I'm gonna go trap, whatever. Whatever. You know, it's not the type of thing you could just be dropped in without tools and modern equipment and supplies and survive in. I just don't believe it's possible. But other environments, definitely. Finding wild edibles, you know, it's dependent on the situation. So I just want to be clear that it's a calories in, calories out for me here, right now, today. I'm not going to go around burning calories. I'm going to conserve the ones that I already have. And I know from doing the math and from doing my research that I can probably live about 30 days. Given I have water, lots of water here, I can make a fire and purify it. I can live 30 days without doing very much. As long as I don't burn my calories, as long as I don't get wet, as long as I don't burn them excessively on making fire. And that comes to fire. Fire to me is a luxury. Fire to me is for purifying water. Fire to me is not a comfort item. It's not something I need even today. I have clothing on. The clothing is my fire. You know, if I went and collected wood, I would get warm. So fire to me is not something that I use for warmth or comfort or peace of mind or anything like that. Fire to me is for purifying my water and cooking my food. Aside from that, there's no fire. There's no reason to be wasteful about having fire, tending to fire. You know, it anchors you down, it costs you calories. So yeah, I want to be pretty clear about my take on fire. And I think that's the wise decision. I think in the scenario, in a long-term scenario, you're not going to want to burn calories. I think it's just a smart thing to do. So from doing just that small amount of work, I can feel that I'm becoming dehydrated. Even in the winter, you can become dehydrated. You sweat in your clothing without even noticing it. So the best way for me, like I said, water is not an issue where I'm at in Canada, in Ontario. Water is absolutely everywhere. So to get water, all you have to do, you know, is scoop it out. That's pure fresh water. It's likely quite potable even at the moment without doing anything at all. But to be on the safe side, I always boil my water. It goes without question. It's not a risk I'm willing to take. So creek water, fine. Pond water is fine as long as it's boiled. Snow is fine, ice is fine, but they take a little bit more work. So any kind of running water, that's where I'm at. So as you can see, I've got a pile of birch bark, but most of this is pretty wet and unusable. I could dry it out with my hands, but I've selected some of the drier stuff here, and the trick is to score it up so that it becomes more fine, more like fine paper, and that'll catch an ember a lot better. So I've had to use my knife and cut some shavings off that one. Now it seems to be going a little bit better, but still having to fight that moisture. So instead of going small fire, we're going to go big fire and try to dry this stuff out. My only goal right now is to purify some water and cook my venison, and then we won't need the fire anymore, because as you see, fire is a lot of work. I'll throw all this on there and I'll let the fire dry it out. So I've just thrown the pot in there really tight to the flame, because it's not going to boil probably there, but it'll start to heat up, and I've got a pretty tall fire now because, like I said, the wood's all wet, so it's giving me some difficulty. And I don't have a big saw with me, just a little saw, so I can't cut big timber, which would be, timber would be drier in the middle. So, I'm doing a big twig fire. And it'll burn down to coal, and then I'll be able to throw the meat on at that point and cook it up. So it's looking a little bit better now. These are some of the toughest conditions that people don't realize that rain is not bad, but freezing rain that freezes to a tree is actually worse than it's worse than just pure rain, because it just sticks in the branches, it gets soaked in, and then it freezes in there, and then when you heat it that moisture comes out. So it's actually a lot worse than it's worse than just rain. Although rain presents its difficulties too, but you know, once you've dried it, it's dry, it's warm. But this stuff refreezes, it gets wet, it refreezes, and it gets inside the bark, and then it comes out when you heat it. So another issue to deal with. So I've just moved the pot up top now. It gets more heat that way. We've got a little bit of steam, so that tells us we're on the right track, but we're not quite there yet. Just got to wait for that sound to go for a hard boil for about a minute or so. So I've just taken the lid off, and just for a visual inspection, I see that the water's boiling, so that's safe now. I'll transfer it to my drinking cup, and then I'll continue to cook the rest of my food. Alright, so everything's done, including potable water. Just lift this off. See? That actually that should sit a little bit longer with the lid on. Just let the moisture go back into the rice and even it out. The venison looks good. I'm just gonna keep that warm. And I was asked if I can make like bushcraft stuff. I don't know, is that a bushcraft spoon? I don't know, does it matter? I'll use it to eat my rice, like it'll scoop. And if I want to spend more energy, I can make it nice and pretty, but that took me like a minute, and then I can just throw it away. Or I can keep whittling it. But the thing is with these bushcrafty things, that I have no way of sealing this up. Like I can't, you know, I can't put a lacquer or a varathane on there to stop the bacteria from going inside there. So every time I use it, I take the risk of catching something or making myself sick. So I'd have to disinfect this every time. I can't, you know, wash it out in the river, but then I've got river water in it. You know, I could cut it down, but then it gets smaller every time. So, you know, this is just a, you know, is this bushcraft? I don't know. That's the thing. With bushcraft, you take, you go above and beyond what's necessary. And this, to me, is enough to scoop up rice and eat it. So, starting to get dark. I can see the sun hitting the, cresting over. I saw it back there a while ago. So it's gonna be dark here in, I guess, maybe 45 minutes or so. So the biggest concern now is staying warm, obviously. I've eaten, I have a full stomach. I shouldn't waste it by continuing the fire. I should preserve what I have inside my body. So the right thing to do in this situation is just to go to bed. Lay down and go to bed. And try to stay warm, huddling up inside the blankets and whatnot. In a short-term scenario, if I wasn't too concerned with like a long-term, months on end kind of thing, I'd just tend to the fire, sleep by the fire, and burn tons and tons of calories just maintaining a fire right now, just so I wasn't cold. But there's no issue with being cold, although it's difficult to get your sleep in your REM sleep, so that won't happen. But you're not burning calories, and calories is the main ingredient in survival. You have to keep the calories that you have, and you can't burn through the water that you have stored inside your body, because then you have to go repeat. And like I said, in winter northern situation, you can't go and get food. So the food that I ate is the food that I have. This has to last me theoretically until I get rescued, or follow the stream down until I reach civilization, which almost always happens. So that's a pretty good tip. Just follow the stream down. Eventually you'll end up in a bigger water and bigger water and bigger water, and eventually you'll end up in a city or near the ocean, in which case you'll be by the city anyway, or in my case the Great Lakes. So anyway, so my plan is just to chill out. I'm probably not going to head to bed right now, because that'll be 12 hours of sleep, which is not bad. I mean, I could just go ahead and do it. But I'm not in a situation that I need to conserve calories, so I'm just going to look around a little bit and see if I can find anything interesting. I didn't mention, or maybe I did, but there's I can make some tea, some cedar tea. I could boil a little bit more water while I have some ember left, and go to bed with a warm belly. That would help, and some vitamin C from the cedar. But yeah, I feel fine. I'm not going to do that tonight. I'll conserve my calories. I think there's a big difference between survival and thriving. I think survival is just you don't die. Like, you're in a natural situation, away from civilization, or you could be in civilization, it doesn't really matter. But you don't die. You just do whatever it takes not to die. That's survival. Survival is like you're in a precarious situation. You don't excel. You don't, become stronger. You don't develop as a human. You don't have culture or art or music or anything like that. That's survival. Survival is just basic. And then there's something else called thriving. Thriving is what cultures do. Thriving is what the human population has done. We've thrived. We've invaded all facets, all environments, and we've taken over. That's the difference between survival and thrival. That's a word. It's not a word. It should be a word in the outdoor community. Thrival. But in order to thrive in an environment, I think is something orders of magnitude above just basic survival. Survival you can do for probably 60 days, 45 days, doing probably nothing except drinking water occasionally and keeping warm, which might be a challenge in this situation here. But in a tropical situation, 45 days, if you've got decent shelter and you do nothing, you could probably live off your fat reserves. You drop 25-35% of your body mass. I don't have a lot of fat reserves on me personally, but I could afford to chew through a lot of muscle mass. Actually, an effort to prepare for this, if I do get chosen, 6 months back, 8 months back, when the first application came through, I started lifting weights because I can't gain fat. I just have my body's just not designed to do that. So what I did was I started lifting weights, and I added 7 pounds of muscle, which is better than nothing. So I've got 7 pounds on top of my basal mass that I can afford to burn through. So that's 7 pounds of food attached to my body that I can burn through, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. And I think on the first show you were allowed to bring 5 pounds of food. So I think 5 pounds of food plus, that's 12 pounds of food. And I think by physiology, you can burn through the calories easier maybe if they're attached to your body. I'm not sure, maybe somebody can look that up, but yeah, so I did that for that reason, and also for aesthetic reasons and health reasons and so on and so forth. But one of the reasons was so that I could bulk up and have that extra 7 pounds to take with me, and I kind of topped out at the 7 pound mark. I couldn't get any higher than that, and that's okay because that's my homeostatic weight. The best thing about being alone in the woods, well, the best thing about survival in the woods is probably nothing. It's a challenge, I guess. That maybe that's the best thing. It's a challenge to be alone or to survive in the woods. To be alone in the woods is good for a week. It's very peaceful. You only have to worry about one thing, yourself. You don't have to worry about pleasing anybody else. So that's definitely the best thing about being alone in the woods. I don't mind company though. I don't mind going out with other people. But if I don't have anybody else to go with, I'll go by myself. I don't have an issue with that. It kind of drags on after 5 days, but and then you start missing your family, and you want to go home and see people and talk to people. That's all part of the normal human condition. So yeah, I think the best thing is just you only have to worry about one thing, and same with the survival situation. You only have to worry about one thing, and that's you. But that's a pretty important thing, when you come from a pretty abundant environment to switch to only having to take care of one really important thing. But of course you have safety nets involved when you do the exercise like this, so it's not a big concern that I have. I think one of my biggest assets in this challenge is that I'm pretty pragmatic. I'm very I put a lot of thought into things. I've done a lot of research. I have a plan in my mind. Like I say, I think I mentioned before, I'm about math. So this is going to be calories in, calories out for the long haul. So I'll be really careful about how I expend my calories. If I'm going to go burn a calorie, I want to make sure a calorie comes back. And I understand that the physiology that I have about 45 days, if I did absolutely nothing and just sat on my butt and did, just had some water, I could probably last 45 days. So I think that's the benchmark. So I think that's my asset, is this. I'm going to be very careful about how I use my calories, and if I do have lots of calories and I figure out a system, I'll exploit that system, and I'll continue to exploit that system once I develop it. But it'll be a little bit of trial and error depending on the environment that I'm in, whether or not I can find a system to exploit. Presumably I'll be in an environment that has enough resources where that's possible, but that's entirely not up to me. So it'll be interesting to see if the strategy will work. Going full in and having a lot of confidence probably isn't, but having a calculated guess about the theory about survival, the theory about lasting a long time independently, I think I have correctly. So whether it pans out or not is kind of out of my hands. It's up to my own body and my own physiology, a little bit of luck, whether I can get the right things to work at the right times, and I don't pick up a virus or disease or become ill or bacteria or whatnot. So really, yeah, I think that's my biggest asset, is that I'm determined and I can think about things in a more rational way without becoming emotional. So just be calm, stoic, and focused. One of the biggest things I've learned from just being outside and being a woodsman is that you can't control nature. Nature does what nature does. Nature is all around us, and nature's going to carry on without us. Whether we destroy the planet or not, nature is going to come back and it's going to do what it does. And we're only on this planet temporarily. We're not going to outlive the planet. At least personally, we won't. I won't. You won't. But the planet will carry on. So it's a matter of adapting to the external forces that are around us, instead of trying to turn the environment into something that we can control. I mean, we can temporarily control it while we have our health and our youth, But as we age, we exit that physical environment and become more up here. And then once we don't have up here anymore, we lose down here and we lose everything, and we become back as part of a different part of nature. So I think it's just a matter of, I have a lot of respect for nature. I have a lot of, I just know that I can't make it do what I want it to do all the time. So I have to kind of flow with it. Yeah, I mean, nature is a pretty powerful thing, and it can easily destroy you, especially if you think you can destroy it. You know, if you can ignore the forces that act upon you, you'll soon realize that nature is a lot stronger than you ever thought it was. So I think just knowing that is something that I've learned just from being outside, and taking things slower, and taking it in, and just enjoying the things that are around me is something that you just can't get from, you know, seeing it on television or talking about it or reading it in a book. You have to come out and do it. One of my absolute worst outdoor experiences happened in high school. I was out with a buddy. We walked back a few kilometers to a secret brook trout lake. We followed a snowmobile trail, and then we slept in a tent that night. And wouldn't you know, that night it rained, and it rained since we went to bed till we got up the next day, and it continued to rain. Well, we didn't have snowshoes, and the snow was about 5 feet deep, and the lake we were on was full of slush, so we had to pull our sled through slush, wet boots, the whole works. Turns out it took us over 12 hours, 10-12 hours. We didn't get out till 10 p.m. We left 10 a.m. that morning. As soon as we woke up, we knew we were through. So we started 10 the next day. We didn't get out till well after dark. My buddy's dad, he came looking for us. I'm not sure if he found us because we got out in time, so we crossed paths at some point. But yeah, 12 hours of just slugging it out, and we because the crust on the snowmobile trail had hardened up. Every few steps we'd smash through and go up to our waist. So it was pretty brutal. And something that, you know, makes you respect nature even more. But it was a fun adventure, and I was young enough to appreciate it, and we pushed through and we made it out, and we had a good story, and we caught some fish. So it was a thing, but also, yeah, it definitely made me respect nature even more. Well, I think the worst part of this is tucking in and using all your body heat to heat up the sleeping bag. So I'm gonna give this a go right now, and we'll see how she goes. So I've been really careful to stay dry. My hood's not too bad. It's a little bit damp, but it's not too bad. If I was gonna be in out long term, I would take this off and keep it dry at all times, because the hood is really vital for keeping body heat at night. I've got my seat system is synthetic bag, which is pretty good in damp conditions. And then on top of that, I've got my good to 0 degree sleeping bag. This is made out of down. If this gets wet, it won't have any insulative properties, but the reality is it doesn't really matter. You know, if they both get wet, they will have no insulative values at all. And the next thing I always do, like as far as winter goes, toque for sure, and like I said, the hood is vital also. You don't want your neck exposed, and then you can even tighten this down. You don't want neck in front, neck in back. So really the only thing that's going to get cold is here, and I can tuck right up. I don't want to breathe inside my sleeping bag either, because that's going to add a lot of moisture in there, and then the moisture is just going to make it feel a lot colder. So anyway, yeah, it's pretty comfy. You can see there's not a lot of space. This is my hand outstretched here, so it doesn't touch. Like, it's basically like being in a sausage. You don't want a lot of extra airspace, but you don't want it to be totally sealed like a plastic bag either, because then the moisture will build up and condense in here. So there's gonna have some airflow up above my head, and that's just fine. But yeah, I feel warm actually. The sleeping bags are working. I have socks on. My socks, I feel they're damp, so I'll take those off. Because there's no point in having wet socks. There's no point in having anything wet. If anything I had on right now was wet, I'd take it off, because it'd be better to take it off than have it. It doesn't have any insulative values whatsoever when it's wet. So my socks I'd probably remove, and then I'd work to dry them out the next morning. And any other clothing that I had wet too, but I was very careful today not to get wet. That's pretty vital. Oh, I'm not sure what time it is. The moon's pretty bright, and I'm actually it's pretty cold, and I had to pee, so I got up, and I think I'm just gonna go run around for a little bit just to warm up, and then I'll hop back in bed. And I don't bring a watch with me, so I never really know what time it is. And it doesn't matter what time it is really. So it's been pretty cold. Quiet though. It's actually quite peaceful camping out by the river here. So yeah, I mean, there's a whole world of difference between camping at, you know, 10 degrees Celsius plus versus 10 minus. That's for sure. So I don't know if I want to camp this cold all the time. You know, a couple nights is all right. Pretty beat up by the second day. Having to do this without food would be extremely difficult. So anyway, I'm gonna go empty my bladder, and then I'm gonna run around a bit and jump back in bed. Oh, that feels a lot better. I just kept my jacket on this time. You can hear the creek running. Very peaceful to camp beside. It's definitely a long night. I think sunset's 6 o'clock. Sunrise is about 7, I believe, something around that. So that's a long night. But instead of spending a lot of energy by the fire, it makes more sense just to tough it out, be cold. But even if I went to collect wood, I would get warm, so just the act of collecting wood would be enough to replace having the fire. The fire gives you a little bit of energy back, but only if it's not so costly. A costly fire that you have to work to keep going will burn more calories than it will save as far as heat loss, especially when I have blankets here. It's doubtful I'd be hypothermic unless I ignored how cold I was and didn't get up and move. But I've got calories to burn at the moment, so that's okay. So I don't know how many hours I have left to sleep, but I'm not going to get up until it's light out. And I'll think about what to do next. Most likely I'm going to pack it out. I can talk a little bit more about what's available as far as food goes, and talk about more of my tactic for surviving in this environment but it's pretty stark. It's winter, so any animal that lives in this climate either lives off fat reserves or hibernates or stores food. You know, we have the squirrel. The squirrel works all summer to store away food. And then we have animals like deer, and they'll continue to move around throughout the winter, but they mostly live off fat reserves. They'll eat some browse, but not much. There's not much left. If there's a hard winter, many deer die because they can't get enough food to survive the winter. And then further north we have bears, and they simply hibernate. They live off fat reserves. One of the more unique species, I suppose, is grouse, which are active all year round. And they make a living off of whatever they can find, similar to other birds. But if the snow gets really deep, they can burrow underneath the snow and live underneath the snow and have access to fresh browse and plants and other insects they can dig up, scratch up under the snowpack. And then there are others like scavengers, like coyote, and they're active all the time as well, all throughout. And they'll follow animals, smaller animals around and hunt them. But as far as wildlife goes, that's about it. I mean, there's raccoons and there's mice and so on and so forth, but they burrow. Raccoons will go into hibernation mode as well, coming out if the weather's a little bit mild. But I think we have a lot to learn from these animals in this climate and what they do to survive. And we have to imitate what they do. Unless we have an established culture, society, people to depend on, and to that we're a lot like many animals. We take after them quite a bit, and we store our food and we hibernate in the winter, in the cold months. And that's actually the right thing to do. Is not much, and forethought and planning in the summer months. So having a good cache of food is definitely vital in this environment. Sun's been up for a while, but I haven't been motivated to get going yet. That's one of the downfalls of being sheltered in the woods, is the sun doesn't hit you for a long time. So you're getting like full shade, which is kind of brutal getting going. But once I get going, I'll be fine. Also, the wind's gonna pick up too, looks like. The best course of action for today would be to get into south-facing sun, but shielded from the wind. Deer commonly do this. They'll bed down during the day, active at night during the coldest parts of the day, and then they'll find a nice south-facing slope, and they'll sit on that slope and catch the sun all day, so they're not burning calories while they're not moving. So yeah, I'll pack my stuff up right now and get going. Maybe do a little bit of a walk. quite a few tracks around here. I did hear a squirrel chattering this morning. Didn't like seeing me, seeing my setup there. But you could see a lot of squirrel tracks in here. And squirrel could be trapped. I could trap the squirrel or snare, but I need the wire, and I'd have to set up quite a few snares to be successful. That might be fruitless endeavor for a pretty small prey item, although it's possible. Like I said, it's be pretty difficult to do, but and it might consume more calories than it produces, but that's an option. Squirrel. I heard birds, small birds I wouldn't bother with. They're actually pretty small. They don't produce a lot of meat by themselves. And rabbit would be something worthwhile pursuing, but there's not a lot of rabbit in this area. I didn't see many tracks, a few here and there. Difficult to snare in these conditions because they're not very plentiful, and they're also the snowpack's not very deep, so they're not concentrating the rabbits that much. So aside from that, I mean, there's not a lot of wildlife in the winter. You just don't see it in this climate. There's a kind of a knoll here, and there's another place where we could find a little bit of browse. If I was a herbivore, as I'm an omnivore, I can also eat some browse. But this grass down here, poking through, I mean, that's food for a deer. That's food for a grouse. I could eat that. Most grasses are edible. I'm not going to get a lot of nutrition from them. Say it's winter time. Cedar. I mean, 90% of what a deer eats in the winter is just cedar. They'll eat the low browse on the cedar plants, and they'll survive off the cedar. They have a pretty strong digestive system that I don't have. And they'll eat the cadmium layer of trees, same as rabbits. Rabbits will eat the bark, and that's edible to humans too. Although, because our digestive system's not very strong, we're not going to get a lot of calories from it. But it's possible to strip off the bark, the outer bark, and eat the inner cadmium layer. Perfectly edible. But like I said, it's going to be a difficult living, and you're gonna probably spend more calories than you'll get back. But there's carbohydrates in them, so and rabbits live off that in the winter, and as do deer. So I've come to a little bit of an opening. I want to illustrate a better option on a sunny day, sunny cold day. -10 or so forecast. I'm not sure exactly what the temperature is, but a deer would find a place like this. A deer wouldn't build a fire, not that it could, and if it could, it probably shouldn't, because like I said, calories burn making a fire. Now, if I could make myself a spot off the ground and I could sit here in the sun, this temperature here now is far higher than it was when I was in the shade in the woods. Shade in the woods is great to get out of the wind. A windy day, a cloudy day, you want to be in the sheltered woods. But on a warm, sunny day, you know, maybe I don't want to get a sunburn. I could turn around, you know, have my back facing the sun, and just lie down right here in the full sun and burn half as many calories as I would in the shade in the woods. So being out in the sun is definitely a better option than building a fire, because of the amount of calories you have to burn in order to sustain the fire. Here it's nothing, it's free. It's solar power. So it's just a straight powder dry if you get on the right day. But the thing about it is you have to come. There's only like a 2 or 3 day window when the pollen's just ready to go, and it will separate from the flower, and then you can pick that up and store it indefinitely. And like I said, you can add it to other flowers. You could add it to the root, the cattail root, and but you have to dry that out and make it into a flower as well. So that's the next thing. If I was to dig down below here, deep enough, I'd come up with a tuber, a cattail tuber, and that tuber is full of starch, full of carbohydrates. It's an excellent food. It could be boiled down and processed out, mashed out, and that white, you'll get a white milky substance, and that can dry, and then you can turn that into a powder for long-term storage. Also, as the season progresses, like in the spring, the energy is stored down in the root and the tuber, just like any perennial flower, and that drives down into the root. And then as spring progresses, the starch will shoot up the stalk up toward the flowering head. So you got to get all that timing right in order to get the most out of the cattail. And then as the season progresses, that stalk will become more woody, and it's not as palatable. It could be roasted over a fire or boiled down to soften, but the best time is in the spring. And then now the plant, I mean, unless it had a pretty decent shovel, it would be hard to get at the root system, but in a pond or the edge of a lake, that stuff's pretty easy to just drive your hand down, feel around for the tuber, and pull the tuber straight out. But at this point, all the flowering head is good for is tinder, and even this as tinder is not the greatest, because for the last few days it's been mild and raining, and now it's turned back cold again. So this is actually fairly wet as far as being a viable tinder, and it's pretty late in the season, and those thaws and melt cycles have turned a lot of that seed to something that's not really very useful anymore. So I'm not even going to bother collecting it. The stalk actually, in the right condition, can be used for hand drill fire, although it can be quite brittle. There's a better plant called mullein, and that you'll find that in disturbed soils. That's actually really good for hand drill fire. But like I said, in this condition, this cattail is not too useful for me right now, and I could spend a whole lot of energy trying to dig out the roots, and I would be better off just to keep the calories I have inside my body at the moment. Rather work fairly well. Aside from that, hand fishing, I could hand fish. I could build some cordage and a gorge hook and bait that up, even set lines and leave them in. But again, that's a lot of work. As in a survival situation, that's something you want to think really carefully about. Do I want to use the calories that I have in my body stored to get calories that are difficult to come by? So in most situations, doing something like that's pretty extreme. You have to have a stored calorie set to work from. So it's not something I would just go gung-ho, jump in the river, start making a fish weir, driving fish from up down and trying to collect them. That would not be a smart move. There's a cedar tree behind me. Cedar tree can be made into a tea for vitamin C. The bark can be used as tinder by shaving it down. Other useful things, if you can find a dry cedar, it makes great bow drill implements. You can make a spindle, fireboard, the whole kit, and a branch for the bow section. So cedar is really great, and it's plentiful again in the river systems and in my area, boreal forest. So anyway, I'm gonna move upstream now, and I'm gonna see if I can get out of this breeze. Okay, now I'm just a few steps in the woods now, and all right, my first order of business is to get out of this wind. It's big open space, and I don't want to be in it, so I'm gonna head back here into the woods. So the thing about these areas, the watersheds, is that there's tons of cattails, and cattails are probably the best survival plant material ever. Not a lot of people know, but if you get just at the right time, you can get this. This is the flowering portion of it. You can get it just as it's producing pollen. And then you can throw a bag over this and shake it out, and the pollen is full of protein and is a great survival food. You can actually add it to any kind of flower. You need a binder by itself. It's just than waste it in pulling out the cattail roots. So I'm just a few steps up, and I've got some tracks. I'd say it's probably goose tracks. The difference between a goose track and a turkey track has a long middle toe. This one does not have a long middle toe. They're all about equal size, so I'd say it's probably a goose by the size of it. It could also be a duck. They have similar prints. As a survival food, pretty stupid to try to get a goose or a duck, although I could probably sit in the woods with a rock and pray that a goose comes by at just the right moment and my aim's spot on and I get one. But this river system is actually quite productive in itself. I know there's lots of fish in the river, small fish, invertebrates if I turn enough of rocks, and also trout. And I know this river system very well, and up ahead there's some deeper water which I know hold trout. Unfortunately, trout aren't in season right now, so I can't fish for them, but I could build a weir or a dam and scare some fish from upstream down and collect them in a little system here, and by funneling them with the rock, and that would